Hello again, my little conscripts, and welcome to another Mordian Glory video. In today's episode, we are going to be casting our ever-critical eye over another 10th edition Imperial Guard Codex datasheet. And this time, we shall be looking at the ultimate meme machine, not just in the Guard, but I would say in all of Warhammer 40k. Have you ever wanted to run a frontline assault tactical nuclear warhead armed vehicle? If the answer is no, then report to the nearest commissar. But if the answer is yes, then you're in luck. For today, we shall be deep diving the Deathstrike. And so without further ado, let's not mess around. Let's get right into this. As is tradition, we're going to start off with a brief overview of the Deathstrike's datasheet, and then towards the end of the video, we're going to get into the tactics and the nitty-gritty detail of how you can use this thing on the tabletop. Starting off with the Deathstrike stat line, this vehicle sits somewhere in between a Hellhound and a Chimera. We've got a movement value of 10 inches, which is pretty standard issue for Guard armoured vehicles in 10th edition. Some of our faster ones go about 12 inches, but typically you'll find us going about 10 inches. With the Deathstrike, it's not a massive deal, its movement, because typically you're going to want to be keeping this thing safe, hiding, so it's not destroyed before it can fire its precious cargo. But to be fair, once Deathstrike Missile has been launched, that movement value does start becoming a bit more relevant, as you can use Deathstrike as a extra bit of objective control or just a bit of an annoying armoured brick to start tying some enemy units up with. Speaking of its armour, the Deathstrike is reasonably durable. It's not going to be like a Lehman Russ or a Rogal Dawn tanking hits, but it will be able to shrug off small arms fire with its toughness of 10, its 3+ save, and 11 wounds. In truth, its leadership of 7 isn't really a big deal. It's almost irrelevant. Battle Shock at the best of times isn't particularly impactful in 10th edition, and this thing is not going to be receiving any orders. It's not got traditional shooting weapons, so you don't need to give it things like take aim, and until it's fired its missile, it being an objective holder is very much a secondary role for it. Same for its objective control of 3. It's nice that it's got a bit more OC than the standard Chimera, but we're taking it mainly for the big rocket, and this only starts coming into play once that has been expended. But let us be honest with each other here for a moment. You didn't come here to learn about the Deathstrike stat line. You came here to learn about that big missile. So let's head over to the weapons and wargear.
Is that a Deathstrike in your trousers, or are you pleased to see me?
And I am going to blue ball you all a little bit. I'm going to edge you just a bit longer, because before we get to Deathstrike Missile, I think there is an important note to talk about its limited, but actually semi-interesting war gear options. You see, as with so many of the Guard artillery choices, we have just a couple of war gear options. We're going to slap a hunter killer missile on this thing. It's free, and it's actually not a bad one-shot weapon. Then it comes down to the heavy bolter versus the heavy flamer. Now, normally with things like Hydra, for example, and even like basilisks and manticores and wyverns, I always say that it feels more natural to default to the heavy bolter because it's just more bullets, it's a longer range weapon, just kind of makes sense, right? The funny thing is with the Deathstrike, I actually think the superior option to stick on this thing is the heavy flamer. And that's because it doesn't have another main gun. Once the missile's gone, it doesn't have another main gun that the heavy bolter can really support. Another long-range weapon that the heavy bolter kind of plays into. Once the Deathstrike missile itself is gone, and we'll be getting to that in a moment, it's just got the hull mount. It's just got that front weapon. And one heavy bolter isn't really great, but a heavy flamer, it's got automatic hits, it can potentially get a lot of hits, and it can also be fired in combat, which does become relevant later on. So I actually think that whilst for most Guard vehicles, just defaulting to a hull mount heavy bolter is fine, I think the big brain move with Deathstrike is to go for the heavy flamer. But again, we're not really here for these little chiclets. All right. Let's get to grips with the Deathstrike Missile and its plasma warhead. Now, normally when we talk about a unit, we cover the weapons here and then we start looking at the abilities. We can't really do that with the Deathstrike because its ability and its weapon are intrinsically linked and are basically the same thing. The ability just describes how you're actually going to fire this thing. So unlike every other weapon in the game, the Deathstrike does not target an enemy unit. You actually get to target the battlefield itself. It's really, really cool. To read the rule verbatim, Deathstrike Missile. In your shooting phase, each time this model is selected to shoot, if it has not shot with its Deathstrike Missile this battle, you can do one of the following in addition to resolving this model's ranged attacks. Firstly, you could designate a target. If this model does not have a Deathstrike target marker on the battlefield, you can place a unique Deathstrike target marker for this model anywhere on the battlefield. Or you can adjust the target. If this model has a Deathstrike target marker on the battlefield, you can move that marker to anywhere else on the battlefield. Now, like I said, this ability links in with the weapon itself, so we have to now go over to Plasma Warhead. Deathstrike Missile. Blast one shot plasma warhead. That's the rule that links down here. You do 2d6 shots hitting on a 2+ at strength 16, AP -4, but only damage 1. Before we break down the pros and cons of this, we'll get to plasma warhead. The bearer can only shoot with this weapon in your shooting phase, so you can't overwatch with it, and only if it remains stationary this turn and you did not use its Deathstrike Missile ability to designate a target or adjust target this phase. When the bearer shoots with this weapon, do not select a target, instead resolve this weapon's attacks, rolling for each unit within 6 inches of the center of the Deathstrike target marker individually. What all of this means is, in your shooting phase, you can choose to put down your Deathstrike marker, but if you put that marker down or you move an existing marker, you won't be able to fire the plasma warhead this turn. So either you move the Deathstrike token around or you fire the missile. Now, I appreciate that, especially if you're a newer player, it'd be kind of difficult to understand what I'm saying. It might not be coming across. It can be a bit confusing. So I want to go for a more visual example here that hopefully will be able to demonstrate how the Deathstrike works. So let us imagine for a moment that this is our battlefield. It's quite a small battlefield, but let us imagine it. On this side, we have got the Deathstrike. And on this side, we have got the opposing enemy forces. We've got some traitor guard that I've been working on. Now, in the Deathstrike's first turn, when it gets to start shooting and doing stuff, it won't have placed a marker on the battlefield yet. So you can never fire the Deathstrike in the first turn, because you need to be able to place the marker to then later shoot the missile. So on our first turn, what we would do is we'd see that there's an enemy unit there, and we would go, I'm going to place down my unique Deathstrike token. Now, to be clear, you can use absolutely anything for this. I've got this little button thing here, but you could use a paint pot, you could use a spare base. It doesn't matter, because damage is resolved from the center of the token. So it doesn't matter what you really use, as long as it's got an easy center to identify. You place it down, and then things start getting hit by the Deathstrike missile in subsequent turns. But going back to the main point, we place our token down. Now, because we have placed our token, because we have designated target, we can't, because of the plasma warhead rule on the weapon, then fire the weapon. So it then goes over to our, do the rest of our shooting, charge, then it goes over to our opponent's turn. Now, they will see that we've placed our Deathstrike token, and they might think, well, I don't want to get hit by that. So they end up moving away from the Deathstrike token. Now, imagine that this now means that this unit is now safe from being hit from the Deathstrike. It then comes back over to our turn, and we, as the controlling player, have the choice. Do we leave our token there, or do we, via adjust target, move the token? Now, if we move the token, because we have either designated target or adjust target, again, we can't shoot our weapon. So there is obviously a bit of an issue here where the enemy could keep moving around away from the token, but that's a double-edged sword. Because on the one hand, they might be moving off things like primary objectives and you're kind of controlling where they want to be. On the other hand, of course, you are not getting to hit them with your Deathstrike Missile. Now, one thing that's very important to understand is, moving these back here for a moment, if the opponent moves away, we don't have to fire the missile. We can leave our token there. We could leave it there until the game ended if we wanted to. And as we'll see when we get into the tactics, there's a very good reason why you might want to do that. To sum all of this up, when you're using your Deathstrike in your shooting phase, you can either place the marker or move the marker around, or you can shoot the missile. But you can't interact with the token and shoot the missile in the same turn. Now that we know how to essentially set the Deathstrike Missile up, now let's get into the power of this weapon. And we have to be real here. For a supposed nuclear exterminatus level weapon, it does feel a little bit underwhelming. 2d6 shots plus blasts is pretty swingy. That's actually less shots than if you were firing a field ordnance battery, because that gets 2d6 and then gets plus blast on each gun, essentially. Blitzkrieg 2 Plus is very, very good though, and strength 16 means that it's going to be wounding pretty much any infantry in the game on 2s and any vehicle in the game on 3s or better. AP-4 means you're guaranteed to be kicking people down to their invulnerable save if they may not even get a save at all. And then we have got the thing that I think upsets the most people is the damage of 1. It does feel a bit weak that a Deathstrike Missile is only 1 damage. However, I am one of the few people that have used a Deathstrike Missile in a game. And not only that, but I used it actually at a tournament. And one thing that I realized is that looking at the Deathstrike as an individual is not the way you want to do things. You want to look at this as 3 Deathstrikes, because if you're in for a penny, you're in for a pound. 1 Deathstrike, people will try and tank that. You slap all 3 Deathstrike tokens down in one area, and it absolutely forces your opponent to make a difficult decision. It's a dilemma. Because on the one hand, all the Deathstrikes might roll like shit. They might even just roll average. And you might think you can take that. But if these Deathstrikes start spiking, they can actually do a lot of damage. I have had triple Deathstrike. I had it fail to wipe out a unit of 10 cultists. And then the next game, I had them completely clear the enemy objective. In both games, it wasn't the actual damage of the Deathstrike that was impactful. It was the potential that they brought to the table. This here, when massed up, when you take 3 of these things, is a huge psychological weapon. And almost the stats here, they're almost irrelevant. It's not the actual damage that this thing can do. It's the potential damage it can do. This is a weapon of terror. And its main damage it will do to your opponent is psychological and messing with their game plan. Do they leave something fragile, hoping that they can just sort of waste the Deathstrike missiles? Or, because you're going to be looking at this like putting on enemy home objectives, for example. Or do they put something valuable on the home objective? It's tricky. And that really does lead us into the tactics for the Deathstrike. You see, so many people see this weapon as just a meme, as a write-off, as something that has no place in a competitive list. But it does actually have a couple of hidden tricks up its sleeve, which make it a lot better than people give it credit for. Is it competitive? Very, very, very debatable. And if I were to say yes, I think a lot of people would completely lambast me. But I found these things, I took them as a meme to a tournament. It was a challenge that was set by my community. And I actually came away undefeated using 3 Deathstrikes. You see, the first trick is, as we said or alluded to a little bit earlier, objective denial. So many people rely upon just having something semi-fragile on their home objective, something cheap, something that is like the minimum value that's going to hold that objective, so they can then put the other 90% of their points in their list into going forward, smash, fight. The Deathstrike completely throws that out, throws that equation out, because yeah, the 2d6 might be super swingy, and I might not be able to clear away your 10 cultists, for example, your 5 Sisters of Battle, your 5 Intercessors. Or it massively spikes and just blasts them all. Just gets all of them. And here's the thing. I don't have to fire every single Deathstrike. I could put 3 tokens down on your home objective. You're like, well, I'll just leave 5 Intercessors there. Hopefully they'll tank it. The first one goes off. I resolve the first Deathstrike. It turns out that it just absolutely goes ham. It gets 2d6 plus blast shots. They all end up hitting. They all end up wounding. You don't get an armor save. And then I just kill your Intercessors. And then I've still got 2 Deathstrikes left in the bank that I might be able to do the same thing again next turn if you move something else back onto your objective. Or I can move them somewhere else and start messing with other objectives. And what's really important to understand is, because the Deathstrike isn't targeting a unit, it's targeting a point of the battlefield, it can actually affect a really wide radius. This is every unit within 6 inches of the center of the Deathstrike target. That's 6 inches left, that's 6 inches right, that's 6 inches up, that's 6 inches down. That is a 6-inch radius. That is a 12-inch circumference. That is a really large area effect, especially when we're thinking about 40k boards, competitive 40k boards, where A, they're just naturally a bit smaller than traditional 6x4 that we used to have in other editions and we still have in other games. And B, when you think about competitive boards where it's like a few L-shaped ruins that people stage their armies behind, you could go after an enemy home objective with this, or you could put 3 Deathstrike tokens behind a key staging ruin of the opposing army and completely mess with their game plan. You don't have to put it near units. You can put it where you know your enemy's going to want to move to. And then if they don't, you can deny them the cover. And then if they don't go to that cover, then you're starting to mess with their head. You're screwing their game plan. You might be making their movement a lot less efficient. And if they do go there, well, in my experience, triple Deathstrike more often than not ends up doing a pretty good amount of damage. Remember, don't think of this as 1 missile. Think of it as 3. In for a penny, in for a pound. Go big, go home. So it's great for objective denial. It's great for staging denial. Another big thing that Deathstrike has going for it is that a lot of people haven't played against them before. So no one's got any reps against them. No one's got any experience against them. So it can be very, very difficult for your opponent to judge what they can do. Now, when you're playing in a... This is the kind of ironic thing about the Deathstrike. In a casual setting, people start getting the measure of them, and so they'll be able to know, if you're using this against your mates all the time, they'll start getting a good idea of what the Deathstrikes can do, what they can't do, how swingy they're going to be. It stops becoming a dilemma, it starts becoming another problem which has a solution. But at tournaments, this is why the Deathstrike's weirdly better in a competitive scene than a casual scene. In tournaments, people never come across these things, so they've not got any experience against them, so often they're facing off against them for the first time. And it can really mess with people's heads. The number one reason why I went undefeated in the tournament that I took my Deathstrikes to was because my opponents didn't have that frame of reference, so they had to play it more cautiously than they wanted to. At the end of every single game, my opponent said that if they play the Deathstrikes again, they wouldn't be as bothered by them and they'd be able to handle them. They'd be able to sort of play the game, the Deathstrike game. But when's the next time I'm going to face them? Am I going to bring them to the tournament in that same local scene? Probably not. I did it once. It was funny. But if I was to take these to a GT or a Super Major, again, in a new meta, a new scene, all of those people, again, have got to face off against them the first time. The magic of the Deathstrike is, once you face it once, you get the measure of it. But typically, no one's faced off against them before, so they have to get the measure of it in the game that you're playing against them in that tournament, and that can be the difference between defeat and victory. But I have to save my favorite thing till last, because a lot of what we talked about up until now has been kind of talking about the psychology of war. We've been talking about the intangible nature of it. Like, you can, in theory, deny points to the board, but the enemy could, you know, move away. By the way, don't ever try and chase enemies with Deathstrike tokens. Pick a part of the board you want to lock down, and then just lock that point down. That's the way you play them. Don't play the chasing game. You want to be proactive with them, not react with them. But anyway, this is the big thing that I love about Deathstrikes, that is tangible. When you tell people about it, it's like a light bulb goes off. A lot of people, I said earlier that it's AP -4, so a lot of the time people don't get armor saves against it. Either they're getting an invulnerable save, or it's like cutting through their armor. A lot of people say, well, more that's not true, right? Because it's an indirect fire weapon, so they get the benefit of cover. So even like a 3-up save would have an armor save against a Deathstrike. So that starts, and 2-up saves would be like a 5-up, and that really starts cutting down on its effectiveness, right? Wrong. You look at that stat line right there. At any point, do you see the rule indirect fire? No. Because the Deathstrike isn't an indirect fire weapon. It fires without needing line of sight, but it doesn't have the indirect fire keyword, universal special rule. What this means is, unlike so much other artillery, that the enemy's always getting indirect fire, so they're always getting that +1 save, so it really messes with like the low AP. You don't get the benefit of cover against Deathstrike unless your models are actually in the cover. You just get hit by this thing. So if your opponent is behind an L-shaped ruin, but none of that squad is in the ruin, because a lot of them are just at the L-shaped without the big square base, you hit the Deathstrike, they don't get a cover save, because it's not got the indirect fire keyword. And it's brilliant. It completely catches people off guard. And again, they think, oh, I think I'll be able to tank that Deathstrike. I think I'll be able to take it because I'll have cover. They don't say it out loud, but that's what they're thinking to themselves. And you just go bang, bang, bang. And they're like, okay, well, I'm going to be on a 5-up save against this. And I'm going, no, you're going to be on a 6-up. And they're like, well, no, I have the benefit of cover. I went, do you? Are you in cover? And they're like, well, it's an indirect fire weapon. I went, no, it's not. It's not. It doesn't have the indirect fire keyword. It doesn't. And so many people just get caught off by this, and it just, again, it messes with their heads. And we're not saying you want. I want something clear. We're not saying you want to gotcha someone with it. Because if someone says out loud to you, well, I'll be on a 5-up save because I'll have the benefit of cover, then obviously you have to say to them, no, because this isn't actually technically indirect fire. But you point this out to them, and it still messes with their head. Because now they're like, well, how durable am I going to be against this thing? It's fantastic. And so even though it's only damage 1, because typically the enemy isn't getting cover from it, it's getting to use the full frontal force of its AP. And because it hits on 2s, it pretty much hits all the time. And because it's strength 16, it wounds most of the time. An individual Deathstrike, like I said, isn't a threat, but 3 of them absolutely are. And again, you're not hitting one enemy unit with this thing. If you're targeting those L-shaped ruins on those WTC and those UKTC boards, if you target key staging points, you can hit so much stuff. Your opponent either has to not stage up, at which point as the guard, fantastic, less pressure equals better game for me, or they do stage up, and you can do so much damage. Not necessarily to one unit, but to multiple different units. And so, as crazy as it sounds, and as much people are going to think that I am bonkers for saying this, I don't think the Deathstrike is the worst unit in the Guard Codex. I don't think it's the worst unit by far. If you ask me what I would rather put in my list, a Manticore or a Wyvern or a Deathstrike, the Manticore would be at the bottom. The Wyvern would probably be in the middle after recent meta changes, but the Deathstrike would be at the top. I want to make something clear. I'd probably take a Field Arms battery and an artillery team over all of them. But the point I'm making here is people write the Deathstrike off as a meme because they just don't look deep enough. And the reality of this thing is, yes, it is a meme, but it's also a dream. At least that's what I think. But of course, all of this is just like my opinion, man. Let me know what you guys think down in the comment section below. Have I completely lost the plot? Or do you think I'm onto something? Do you think the Deathstrike might actually be a little bit of a hidden gem? If you enjoyed today's video, don't forget to go ahead and smash that like button and also subscribe to never miss an episode. Would you like to know more? If so, then please consider becoming a channel member or patron. By supporting the channel, not only will you be doing your part, but you'll also be helping me create more content for your viewing pleasure and unlocking a whole host of perks. You get everything from a badge next to your name, custom emojis, but the big one is access to the Mordian Glory Discord server, an online community with almost 2,500 active members. It's always popping off in the MG Discord. We've got channels for army lists, hobbying, tactics, stories, and even a pretty spicy meme section as well. For all you greenhorns that wanted to see the Mordian glory hole, today is your lucky day. And joking aside, I do want to say a massive thank you to all of the current channel members and patrons. You guys are amazing, truly the lifeblood of the channel. I could not do Mordian Glory full-time without the incredible and generous support of my members, so thank you guys so much. And last but certainly not least, I want to say a personal thank you to all of my top tier Patreons. These are the War Masters, the people who have truly gone above and beyond the call of duty. So a heartfelt thank you to Alex Dengal, Bon Vert, Lord Pryor, Mark Panconi, RJ Scorpion, Swordfish Trombone, Try Again Bragg, John Stubbs, Nick Walsh, Diesel Fox, and August Barney. Seriously guys, thank you from the bottom of my heart. Your support is incredible and it makes a huge difference. Thank you so much. That's all for now. Hope you've all enjoyed today's video, and of course, as always, see you guys next time.